When looking at a work of art, one of the first questions that come to mind is, how is this organized? Describing the composition is an effective and direct way of talking about the organization of an artwork. So what is composition? Simply put, it is the arrangement of forms in an artwork. Let us take as an example this Greek relief sculpture. It is obvious with even a cursory glance that the work forms a single piece. Your eye has no desire to stray outside the frame. Quite the opposite, in fact. You are continually drawn into the center of the piece. This central element is called the focal point and serves as the heart of the composition. Often the most important or dramatic action is shown at or near this focal point. Here the hero Heracles, holding the heavens on his back, glances down at the golden apples of the Hesperides brought by the supernatural Atlas. This rich prize is the end of one of Heracles' 12 labors, but before he can have them he must outwit Atlas, who has no desire to take the heavens upon his shoulders again. This moment, with the glance down at the apples, is pregnant with meaning and tension. Most importantly for us, the designer of the composition shows us how important this moment was by placing it at the very center of the composition as the focal point. We may take this analysis a step further by showing how the artist balanced the composition on either side of the focal point. If we draw a line down the center of the composition, crossing Heracles, we see that there is one figure on either side of this line. Further, each figure is equidistant from the central figure. There is very close to perfect symmetry operating here. Also, note how each of the flanking figures turns to look at the center of the composition, once again drawing our eyes back to the center and the focal point. Not all compositions are so balanced or rationally laid out, but all works of art are composed by their very nature. Any formal analysis of a work of art will attempt to tease out the nature of that composition. One way in which many Western compositions are ordered is through perspective. Perspective may be defined as the representation of 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional plane. In other words, perspective makes a flat surface, like a sheet of paper or a canvas, seem like it has depth. One way of doing this is to make objects far away, fuzzy, and gray, as we see here. Another way to give depth to a flat surface is to make all parallel lines and edges recede toward a single point. This is called linear perspective. Here, all the edges of architectural features, if extended, would end at exactly the same point on the horizon, called the vanishing point. Objects in the distance grow smaller in direct relation to the narrowing of the spaces between the lines that move toward the vanishing point. This single-point linear perspective was a development of the early Renaissance in Italy. Other traditions had ways to indicate depth that were not so systematic. For example, much ancient Roman wall painting seems to have a sense of linear perspective without ever systematically ordering the lines to a vanishing point. We sense a receding into depth on the right side of this painting, but when we draw out the edges, they scatter across the composition and certainly do not end in a single vanishing point. Most ancient cultures did not use linear perspective. The creation of a deep illusionistic space on a 2-dimensional surface has not always been the goal of art. On the contrary, many traditions seem intent on exploring other organizations and other messages. That said, there are a multitude of ways an artist can cue depth perception without using a perspective technique. To take the example before us, the artist has placed some of the animals above the others, while we read those above as slightly behind. Hence the formula above means behind for this system. At the same time, the artist here is able to cover much more of the relief surface with interesting detail. Imagine the enormous empty space at the top of the picture if the artist had employed a perspective system. To sum up, composition is one of the fundamental elements in a good formal analysis of any work. Perspective, while by no means universal, played a very important role in the way the West thought of composition.